Hello, everybody, and you're welcome to Progress Over Perfection. As you know, we talk about Every Daughter's Matter, this beautiful entity that try to help, and that's the best to help the girls go from Nepal and India. And Darren is here with me and very nicely answering my questions. Thank you, Darren, again. The last two episodes, we're talking about what is Every Daughter's Matter, and the second was about why these girls get exploited. Now, I would like to understand where these girls go, because if I think there is a demand about this, and can you tell us
Yep.
what is the demand? Where they go? Who require these girls?
Unfortunately, human nature, yeah, if greed, I think if I was saying, I think earlier that if you could eliminate two things from this planet, I'd eliminate vulnerability or poverty, and I'd eliminate greed. And when those two things align, people get hurt badly, and people will be exploited for whatever they can be. So I guess there was a recent video we captured at one of our safe homes of a girl who has actually made it back from India. Now that is rare, and we've spoken that it's only about 2 to 3% that ever get away. This was a unique situation, which plays into why she was able to come back. She literally sits, and we've got her silhouetted. We've got a translator explaining what happened. This was I think she was only 15. She went out at about midnight in her home in Nepal. She went out to go to the toilet, and some guy grabbed her from behind. He'd been stalking her, and it turns out he was a distant cousin or something, so he actually knew her, and he tied her up and gagged her, and it's almost Hollywood, put her on the back of his bike and took her over into India, where he would then kept her prisoner, and he'd go and work during the day, come home and abuse her at night until he got tired of her, and then he released her. She got home only because he released her. Now, I use that story because it is unique, and it explains a little bit why she was able to get back. This is not typical. Most of the girls that go over are being sucked into the sex industry. You mentioned in a previous episode that there was a 7 or 8 level story building that was all brothels, effectively. Look, I've seen that firsthand, particularly in Thailand, where that goes on as well. And there's a place called Sonagachi in India, which I think is recognized as the single biggest red light district on the planet. I mean, we're talking obviously 1.4 billion people in India. You can imagine the draw. Then you've got, and the perfect storm is you've got vulnerable Nepali girls just north of the border who are easily enticed into coming in. They're always looking for new girls. There's elements like a lot of the Indian men are like girls of fairer skin. The Nepali girls are fairer, so that's an attraction. And look, this one is incredibly disturbing. The industry for organ harvesting in India is huge. They want their kidneys. So even if they're ending up in the sex industry, if they get to a point where they're not earning enough and they're getting older or whatever, they're just not got what's the next best thing? They'll take their organs and don't care what happens to them. This is what we're preventing. But I think the trap we can fall into here is to think that that's a South Asian problem, that is Indian men. And honestly, Indian men are no better, no worse than any other men around the world. And I want to put a finer point on this. So number of years ago, I was working at a previous agency to coming on with Every Daughter Matters, and their job was to go and rescue girls out of bars and clubs. My job was similar to what I do with Every Daughter Matters, was to raise awareness and support for that work. But similar to this work, where I've been to the front lines of what we do, so I can speak with authenticity and some authority on that. I was given the opportunity to go on a couple of undercover rescue operations in Thailand. And I'm just going to backtrack a little bit, because after that trip, there's more to say on that. But there was a clear moment that unfolded, and it was when I got to Bangkok airport to head over to Cambodia. I was traveling on my own, and I made a rookie mistake, Mauro. I didn't prepay the visa to get into Cambodia online, which previously I'd always just paid cash at the terminal when I arrived. Except this time I realised I was a bit short on cash, so I had some Australian cash, I had some Thai baht. I went around, I exchanged what I had and realized that I was $20 short of an entry visa. I had about 20, 25. And there were no ATMs at Bangkok airport, which I was kind of relying on. And I got there and went, okay. So I went to the airline desk and they phoned ahead and said, we've got a guy coming on the flight who hasn't prepaid his visa. And they said, he can't come. I said, well, no, I'm coming. Let's sort it out when we get there, sort of thing. So I reached out to my team. I had some connectivity. So I contacted them and said, hey, I'm coming. I've stuffed up. Is anyone able to meet me at customs? And they said, yeah, we work with custom. Sorry, at this stage I hadn't heard back from them. That's the point. So I got to the boarding lounge and they're calling boarding and I hadn't heard back. And I was like, oh no, okay. So I started going up to complete strangers. Now I'm an introvert, despite the fact that I go and do public presentations and that. This is not my safe space. I was going up to complete strangers in that boarding lounge, anyone who looked vaguely Western, and said, does anyone speak English? Has anyone got any US currency? And they're like, no, we paid online. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what you do. Eventually a guy overheard me, came over to me, and he was a white guy. He turns out he was a British backpacker in his early 40s. And he said, I've got a bunch of US currency. What do you need? I said, mate, it's $20. And he said, too easy. Sounds Aussie, I know. I'm not going to do a British accent. Pulls out his wallet and he's got a wad of US currency and he gives me the $20. I said, mate, you're a lifesaver. Thank you. I've reached out to my team. I'm hoping somebody can meet us so I can pay you back. Or if there's an ATM at the airport, I can sort that out. Gave him my business card. Said, if we don't connect, if I don't see you at the other end, just email me and I'll wire some money or whatever. By the time I got on the plane, I actually had heard back from my team saying, we'll meet you at customs. It's all sorted. We'll have cash for you. And I went, beauty. So it was a little prop job, right? So not a big airplane at all. It was Bangkok Airways. And as I walked past his seat, I just said to him, mate, just letting you know that the money's sorted. It'll be waiting for us the other end. His reaction completely floored me because he looked at me in the eye and he went, yeah, you'd better. And I was like, okay, there was a hostility there that hadn't been there before. In fact, I hadn't even thought he cared too much if he was going to get the money back or not. And I went, okay. So I went, okay, yeah, no, we're good. And I went and sat down and I thought about it and I went, what changed? I gave him my card. And on my card, it said the company name and it said rescuing children from human trafficking. Yeah. And I suddenly looked around that plane and do you know how many single white men were traveling on that plane between Thailand and Cambodia? Can't put it on a number now, but I suddenly saw them through a whole different light and I went, what are they doing? They're not with their families. They haven't got their partner with them. They're traveling solo. They've got their backpacks on. And let's put a finer point on this because this will bring it home. The United Nations released a report back in 2012. Now, it hasn't been updated since then, so it's a one-off snapshot. I'm glad they got it. It was on the sale of children, child prostitution and pornography. They identified in that report that the single biggest group being prosecuted for sex crimes, for tourist crimes in Thailand were Australian men. We made up 31% of prosecutions. Shame on us, because we're part of the problem. So when I go into schools and I'm talking to year 11, 12 students, particularly year 12s, great audience to identify this with, and I share these stories and I go, guys, and I look them in the eye and I say, what sort of men are you? Figure it out before you go, because when you get on a footy trip or a leavers trip and you end up in a bar in Chiang Mai or, Bangkok or whatever, and you're sitting with your mates drinking alcohol, that's not the time to be figuring out what sort of man you are, because you can have these beautiful girls come up and treat you like you're the best thing that's walked in tonight. And they're going to flatter you. And your judgment is going to be impaired on so many levels, not least because you're drinking alcohol. And in that moment, you could make decisions that damage that girl for the rest of her life, and potentially damage you for the rest of your life, because you will realize later, potentially, and you may even be convicted for underage sex crimes while you're there. And don't think just because you get back to Australia that you're safe. You can be prosecuted under Australian law for what you do over there. And look, I think, but I don't even, that's the stick. But I think the thing is, when I look these guys in the eye and go, so what sort of men are you? Are you going to be real men in that moment? And I love the engagement I get in that moment where I sit there and go, when I challenge them and say, are you going to be real men? They'll sit there nodding. And I think that's just an awesome moment. But I go, but it goes one step further. You're going to have some courage, because you might get it. And credit to anyone who's already arrived at that. But you might have to stand up against blokes in your group who don't get it yet. That's going to take some courage, but those girls are worth it. Because if my daughter matters, every daughter matters. And you have the power in your hand to protect them from abuse, and you need to take that moment. So I think, yes, we are part of the problem. But what I would also then balance that with and say, we can be so much part of the solution. When you consider Ross Nankaro, who is just turned 70 a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I think it was, what he has done on the front lines of Nepal. We've rescued over 5,000 girls in 6 years, and that number's on the increase, because he saw it and he said, I'm going to do something about it. Guy that started the agency I previously worked at was an electrician from Cairns. And he saw it in Bangkok and he said, I'm going to do something about it. They've rescued over 22,000 girls out of bars and clubs. This is what Australians can do when we take this stuff seriously. And it's not just Australians. I'm just speaking as an Aussie bloke that says I would love the day to come when Aussies are celebrated overseas because we're the good guys, not fear.
But we are not
bad guys. And
we are not now. Yeah. 31%. Well, you can see how people in Bali see us.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we disrespect the culture of the island, and the way that we treat the people over there. I don't think it's just a problem of Thailand. In this case, 31%.
Yeah,
31% is crazy. Is a thing. I think is maybe we have the money and we believe that we can do whatever we want in this place.
That's a key point there. Yeah, we know that we wouldn't get away with that behaviour here, but something feels like it gives us permission to behave. It is so normalised, and that's why I said don't make that decision when you're there, because it feels like, oh, you're not particularly doing anything wrong.
Wow. Can I ask you your knowledge, because I don't want to make men do this. How many women has been caught in this situation that you know?
That are perpetrators?
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, there'd be an element, and I know that I think probably the worst, from anecdotally what I've heard, and again going back to Thailand, because it's still from an Australian perspective, right? I think when partners of men don't stand up and say, it becomes so normalised by FIFO workers and things when they're with their partners, that because the Thai people don't care. They go, oh, we'll do both of you. Like it's not off limits. Just because you're with a partner doesn't mean you're safe. So I think that women, and this is my challenge when I go into girls' schools as well, is say, are you hearing how boys are talking? You need to address that. You need to have the courage to actually say what you're saying is inappropriate. So that takes courage as well. But I think over in look, there was one lady I met in a bar in Thailand who was the brothel madam, and look, I just wanted to punch her in the face because she was doing the wrong thing. But she was such a lovely person. She was kind and gentle, and yet she's pimping out the girls. Now, yeah, very hard to go, I can't hate you in how I'm interacting with you, but I understand what you're doing, and it's pure evil. So what is it that brought you to this point? were you one of those girls and got caught up in this and haven't known how to, and it's become so normal for you that you just think it's okay. And I think that is a big problem. And I would, let's go back to India and say, I just think it's become so normalized there that if you want to feed your kids and you can't find a job anywhere, but somebody's saying, I'll give you more money than you can imagine if you recruit a girl to come and work in this space.
But can you maybe think that this woman that you were talking about was just another piece of the puzzle? She was there maybe to make her money, her living, and the job was pimping this girl. But on top of her was someone else who would say, if you don't do this, someone else
Yep.
pay you out.
Yep.
Yeah, can be something like this?
Yeah, definitely, yes. And I think, I mean, you look at the whole Nazi Germany thing, right? If one officer were to push back on what was happening, he would be executed or pushed out. So people go along because of the downward pressure, yeah? And I think that's the system we're talking about here. Everybody's playing their role, and if you don't play yours, you're dispensable. You can just be pushed out of the loop. So if you want to feed your children, then, and this is the opportunity that presents, if you don't do it, someone else will. Look, again, if we could eliminate poverty, all this, I think 90% of this goes away. Yeah.
Can I ask you the question that I asked you before about female, but Western women caught to do this kind of thing? So Australian women have been caught doing these things, or you don't have knowledge?
I don't have a lot of knowledge of that. My understanding is, in a broader context, there's about 300 odd human trafficking cases identified in Australia each year. So it's 300, 300 too many, but it's nothing when you compare to 20,000 a year upwards in Nepal. Look, I think a lot. Yeah, look, there was a case here in WA in Geraldton a number of years ago where there are, I believe, a couple of Asian girls were being prostituted out under duress, had been trafficked into Australia, working some of the, I think, in the mine sites, around the mine sites in rural WA up near Geraldton. The company, the agency I was working for, was alerted to that, and they put it onto the local police. We don't have they didn't have jurisdiction here, so they put it onto the Australian feds, and they acted on it, and did make local news. In fact, there was a group called the Midwest Anti-Trafficking Group, bunch of little old ladies, bless their hearts, from an Anglican church up there, who formed a club based on those headlines, saying if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. So they actually became a voice in their community to ensure that would never happen again in Geraldton and around Geraldton. So lovely response by again these ladies, and I went and spoke there at one point and supported what they were doing. Look, it's again everyone is every single, and look, we can't if we don't say that our daughters matter too in an Australian context, and that is probably more about greed than poverty.
Yeah, because
they put them in, right?
No, I'm hearing what you say. I ask you this question because I was reading an article just before to start this interview with you, and this article will say that there is no identification of female perpetrators. This is why I was curious from your perspective, for what you know. Have you ever seen a woman get caught doing this?
Example. So when I was literally at a crossing point, I was standing there. We were just doing some little selfie sort of stuff to tell stories of what was happening with the booth. But it was more generic. Here we are at this border. This is our surveillance booth, and while that was happening, I saw the staff come back with a woman and a girl and were interviewing them at the booth. And she was saying, okay, something's happening right now, and I believe the police have been called into this situation. I don't know what's happening, but it's happening as we speak. That's them being interviewed there. What we were able to understand afterwards was this woman in her 50s was with a girl in her early 20s. They walked straight past us. I didn't see them. Our staff did, thank God. Got to within maybe 10, 15 meters of the border, stopped them, and started questioning them, then brought them back on the basis that they saw they saw enough red flags to believe that something they needed to discuss this further. So they brought them back to the booth, and then next thing you know, the police were contacted. The police came over. What they discovered through the input of the police was, so just before I say that, the young girl was taken off to one of our shelters and she was interviewed there. We dropped in on them a little while later and she was sitting on a bed sobbing. So we could actually see the impact of what was happening. What they discovered is this woman had been posing as this girl's auntie and she was taking her to a job in India. And that was the story that was being told. I don't know the context of what was told to the girl about her family, but she thought she was with a trusted family member going across. That woman had sold that girl. The money had already been transacted, and the guy was waiting at the border to receive her. And it comes back to something you asked earlier was, the fact is when he saw what was going on, he took off. And now we had no jurisdiction to go over and chase him. And we probably didn't have capacity to be honest. That would be the police, but the police probably, by the time they've negotiated with Indian police, he's gone, right? So unfortunate, but I've got another story that where the outcome was that the police actually did a sting operation and took a guy and a girl to the border and enticed the guy to come in to Nepal and arrested him on Nepali soil. So in this case, that didn't happen. But that woman was identified as a trafficker and facing prosecution as we speak. It wasn't all that long ago that she'd be going through the court system for what she did. So yeah, look, I think the thing that really resonated me with that, just being there in that moment, is going, they thought they could traffic a human being in broad daylight in front of a bunch of Westerners who happened to be visiting that booth at the time. They thought they could get away with it because probably 80% of the time they do. It's that clear. So yeah, coming back to your point, this girl trusted this woman because she thought she was an auntie, and where often there is blokes involved, there's something a little bit more damaging psychologically when it's a woman understanding what she's doing and trafficking that girl in full knowledge of what she's doing. It's terrific.
Do we know if this woman did it because money, because what was the?
Yeah, don't know.
Again, poverty is a huge.
Oh, I think it's a safe guess. Yeah, that would be my assumption until I hear otherwise. I would suspect that she's trying to make ends meet herself. Yeah.
Yes. At this point, how you can judge someone desperate, maybe doesn't have food for days in the table, and someone come over and say, "Hey, I give you 1,000, I don't know, money, to give me a girl. With this, you can feed your family for 1 month."
Yeah.
Can you live with that? Maybe if you don't eat, maybe you can do that, right? But I don't know.
Yeah, how we rationalize that. And, I think one of the first things, I think even when I met that, I referred in one of the other broadcasts, this 8-year-old girl I met in Cambodia, Lakana, when I think of where was the father, where, what was he thinking? How did he knowingly, if he did, sell this girl into the sex trade? And I did wrestle with that for a long time. Because how can I not stand in judgment of these people? How can I find any sort of level of compassion for them? But I think the thing where I've landed is just knowing as a father that the only way I would willingly let my girl go into a dangerous situation is if I was just so desperate. And I think that is the case. If you've got 4 children and you can't feed them all, and you're just watching them get more and malnourished. I also mentioned a story before where a little girl I knew got sick during the night and they didn't expect her to live. That's when you're at that level where I could keep 3 safe if I sacrificed almost one for the sake of the others. I'm the dad. I have to make that decision. God forbid you and I would ever be in that situation. And I just, I think we have to look at that as wealthy Westerners and go, how can we judge them? Better that we address the reasons and never let anyone ever be in that situation again. Let's do whatever we can in our power to prevent that. anyone ever having to face that decision.
Do you know what is the biggest market to require this kind of girls?
The sex trade.
Sex.
Yeah. Which again is a very incredibly selfish industry, right? People are, you don't have to have sex. you particularly at someone else's expense. And I just think that's horrific, because no level of desperation means that you need to sexually assault another person. That is just a completely selfish motivation.
And I don't know if I can add this. If I think 99% of the time there is girls, means that 99% of the time they go with men. And 31% can be Australian men.
Yep. Who should know better? And I think we do know better, and we ignore it. So we've just got to be better than this.
All right. Well, Darren, thank you. Thank you for everybody listening, and see you at the next and the last episode. Thank you. Bye.